everyone, and welcome back to the Worm Whisperer channel. Today I'm going to go over a very important but often overlooked topic of worm bedding. This is such an important topic because this is where your worms are going to live for a month or so until the worms have turned the bedding into healthy worm castings in the bin. Worm bedding is the most important thing in your worm bin as it creates a habitat that your worms can thrive in. Normally, in the wild, worms live in the soil, and this will be the worm's home. In a home worm bin, you will need to provide a healthy living environment for your worms. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to keep your worms healthy and happy in their worm bedding. Stay tuned, and at the end of the video, I will give you my go-to worm bedding recipe, so stay tuned. All about worm bedding. Worm bedding, sometimes referred to as worm carbon or carbon, is where the worms are going to live and thrive in your bin. Because if you have an issue in your bin, the worm bedding is where the worms can seek temporary refuge from the issue by crawling and staying under the bedding until the issue is fixed in the bin. It is very important to select the correct bedding for your worm farm. Choosing the correct bedding for your worm farm will also help worm farmers manage the moisture levels in their bin. When selecting the worm bedding, you will want something that is high in carbon and also will absorb your moisture and hold it for your worms to keep them healthy and able to breathe. Characteristics of an awesome worm bedding. When picking worm bedding materials, it is important to consider these characteristics to have great worm bedding. You will be looking for materials that are absorbent and can hold moisture well. Allow for great airflow, something that is neutral in pH value or 7.0, that has no odor, will block out light from the worms, and is completely chemical free and does not have anything in it that can harm your worms. Always remember that worm bedding makes up approximately 50% of your worm's diet in your bin. If it's your first time making worm bedding, remember that it is better to make the worm bedding fluffy rather than compact. Fluffier worm bedding allows for much better airflow in your worm bin. Making your worm bedding. The best way to make a healthy and useful worm bedding is to diversify your worm bedding material. Try not to just use one material for your worm bedding if possible. Keep in mind when making your worm bedding that some types of bedding can hold more moisture than other types of worm bedding. When making your bedding, remember that you should have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 50:1. So, for every 50 parts of carbon or worm bedding in your worm bin, you will want to have about 1 part nitrogen, or in other words, food content. Remember, if you don't keep this ratio, your bin can and most likely will heat up, hurting or even killing your worms. So here are my favorite types of worm bedding explained. First up is cardboard worm bedding. Everyone these days has some cardboard lying around the house. So, for this reason, it is my #1 favorite worm bedding to use in your worm bin. You can use it in whole pieces, ripped up, or shred it, and this is what I like to do with it for my bin personally. Here's a little pro tip. Wet the cardboard overnight with a bit of water. This will make it much easier to rip into pieces if you don't own a paper shredder. Make sure you wring out the cardboard before adding it to the bin to rid it of excess moisture. I find cardboard has great aeration for the worms to live in. It is free and it is an excellent source of carbon for your worm bin. The only real negative that I have found with cardboard is that it takes a bit to prepare for the bin. Other than that, it works awesome for a worm bedding. Next, I also really like to use dried fall leaves as a great bedding source. You can pretty much find them anywhere on the planet. They are free, light, easy to use. I like to just dump them into your bin and they will work really well that way. You can bag them up in the fall and they will last for years. Just keep adding them to your worm bin. They provide lots of air for the worms and break down very quickly. So here's my last recommendation for bedding is cocoa coir. This is the brown husks of coconut and is ground up. This is very cheap worm bedding that can hold water and expands, making it very user-friendly as a worm bedding. Okay, so for last up, and as I promised, now I'm going to give you my favorite worm bedding recipe that I really love to use when I start making a new worm bin. So here it is. I like to use 50% shredded cardboard and 50% cocoa coir. Now, how easy is that? I have been using this recipe for years with excellent success in my bin. It has really great airflow in the worm bedding and lots of room for the worms to move around in it. The worms can also break the bedding down quickly, so this will be more worm castings before you know it. Alright, so that wraps up this video about worm bedding. I hope that you guys all enjoyed this video and were able to learn a few things about worm bedding. Thank you for all of your support of the channel. Have a great day, everyone, and happy worm farming, and I will see you all next time.